Hello, my name is William Parker and I am the historical interpreter up here at Fort Defiance. And I want to talk to you for 15 or 20 minutes today about rations issued to the American soldiers during the Civil War. It's an interesting topic, something that people normally don't think about. Sometimes even countries themselves don't think about it because campaigns and wars have been lost on the inability of countries to properly feed their troops in the field. Also, morale of the soldiers sometimes is directly attributable to the quality and quantity of rations that the soldiers have. One of my favorite quotes is by Napoleon, and he said, "An army marches on its stomach," and that is so true. During the American Civil War, during the 19th century, the United States soldier, on paper, was the best fed soldier in the entire world, even among European armies. Calories-wise, they had more than any of the other large standing armies in the world. And I want to go over some of those today. First off, where did they put this stuff when they got it? I want to start out with this piece of equipment here. This was issued to every Civil War soldier, and it's called a haversack. It was designed exclusively to put your rations in. And the term haversack has been around since the Continental Army, and believe it or not, the Army issued a haversack right on up through the Korean War, and that's what it was called. It was to put your rations in. This one is made out of tarred canvas. It's pretty much waterproof. It's got a inside cotton bag to separate items that might leak in the bag and so forth, but very important piece of field gear right there to carry your food. Now, during the Civil War, the soldiers might be on campaign 7-8 months out of the year. When they were on campaign, they were issued what was called the marching ration. They were also issued rations every 3 days. So once every 3 days, you would line up and you would receive your food for those 3 days. You would, a lot of times too, when preparing to go on campaign, or especially going into battle, the officers will issue orders to have 3 days cooked rations in the haversack. That's what they're talking about here. Now, what did the soldiers have to work with? Not a lot, but it's amazing what they did with what they had. I want to start with Army bread. That's what it was officially called. And it came in wooden crates. You probably have heard the term hardtack before. That's usually what it's come to be referred to as later. The soldiers had different terms for them. They called them teeth dollars, worm castles, and a bunch of other names that weren't very complimentary of it. But what they are, they're a cracker, they're water, salt, and flour. That's it. That's all these things are. And you know what? Not a lot of nutrition in these things, but they're just designed to fill you up. And these are really correct here. I baked these myself probably a year or so ago, and notice they've got mold growing on them. They're period correct right there, because so many times the soldiers or the commissary officers would open up their hardtack boxes and they would be full of mold. One of the reasons, from the bakery, the crackers were placed inside the box while they were still warm. And of course, that's gonna cause condensation in there, which is gonna cause mold. They would also become infested with weevils. Soldiers had a remedy for that. They would crush them up, put them in boiling water. The weevils would raise to the top. They would skim the weevils off and then eat the bread. I've read accounts of the two opening up and they'd be full of cobwebs. But you had, this is what you were issued here. And the ration, I meant to give the explanation of a ration. By Army terms, a ration is what one man consumes in one day. So a ration of these were 10 crackers. So times that by 3, because they're issued every 3 days, a soldier would be given 30 of these pieces of hardtack here. That's probably the most famous of the items that we're going to talk about. Now, the meat ration. It was salted either beef or pork, and the ration for 3 days was 3/4 of a pound. And this just happens to be exactly 3/4 of a pound here of salted pork. And these were issued in large wooden kegs. And when the commissary officers received these things, they would open them up, and they would have been packaged, sometimes quite a while ago, in thick, heavy brine, salted water. And I've read accounts of when these pieces of salted pork were taken out, they had taken on a coppery colored slime on the outside. And the commissary officer would cut off and weigh 3/4 of a pound, and that was what was issued to every soldier. And I'm not kidding when I say I've read some of the Civil War recipes. They got very, very creative on what to do with the hardtack and the salt pork. You could eat it individually. Sometimes, however, they would pool all of their rations and make a big stew out of it, if somebody could cook. By the way, during this time period, the Army did not have cooks. You were on your own when the rations were given to you. Now, the third part, and undoubtedly the most important part of the Civil War ration, was what's in this little poke sack right here. It is coffee beans, whole coffee beans. I've read many accounts that veteran soldiers, when the rations were being issued, they wouldn't even draw the meat or the bread. They didn't want that. But everybody wanted to get the coffee. And I mentioned whole beans. They hadn't, there wasn't instant coffee yet. I am going to give an example here in just a second, though, of one that was tried. But how this was done, whole beans in the bag, they would take a musket, they would crush these coffee beans up, boil them in their tin cup, drop the whole thing in there, and it's going to make a very, very, very strong cup of coffee. A spoon could just about stand up in that. And then you would just use this thing for the next 2 mornings, and probably most of the effectiveness was gone out of this by the 3rd day, and then you would get your next coffee ration. But like I said, this was very, very important. This is just a regular tin cup here. They had one also. Sometimes the soldiers would refer to them as coffee boilers. It had a little lid on it with a swivel. One of the largest, most used terms for it was a bucket. If you ever see that term, you'll know what that is. The reason being, it was a cross between a bucket and a mug. That's how that term came about. But sometimes you see it just called a coffee boiler. Now, I do want to give an example here. The Army did try new things during the war to try to make the soldiers' life a little bit easier. There was an effort to provide instant coffee for the soldiers. It was not successful at all, to say the least. It was a mixture of coffee, sugar, and cream, all in the same concoction. And it was packed. One of the terms I heard to describe it had the consistency of axle grease. And it was packed in these cans, and it would be opened up, and you would scoop out 2 or 3 scoops of this stuff, pour it in boiling water, and enjoy a nice cup of coffee on paper. It didn't work out that way. And believe it or not, Ulysses S. Grant was the one that first proposed this. There was another ration that was a failure too. A couple soldiers claimed they liked it, but pretty much it was universally despised. And it was called desiccated vegetables. And it was an attempt to get vegetables into the diet of the soldiers when they were on the march. And it was compressed into a cake. One of the soldiers even referred to it as baled hay, which probably had the consistency of that. And you were supposed to take this compressed cake, once again, take out your mug or your bucket, boil water, and drop this cake in there, and it was supposed to reconstitute, and you would have a little soup there. Once again, it didn't really work that way. Some soldiers too, once again, they weren't cooks, they were issued these things. Well, they saw it, well, they started eating it on the march. Well, now imagine this thing is in your stomach and starts swelling like it's supposed to in the bucket, and you're out of action for a while. So the desiccated vegetables, which took on the term too, desecrated vegetables, that was a failure also. A lesser extent ration that was issued was sugar, and it came in cones. This is a sugar cone right here. Notice it's brown sugar. This is not the refined white sugar that we see today. It was issued like this, small quantities of it, and you could use it for your coffee, of course. I've read too that some soldiers use this to fry their hardtack in, and their salt pork to give it a little bit of flavor. Now, if you were a Confederate soldier, probably not going to have access to whole coffee beans, but that's something that they wanted. They wanted coffee in the morning too. One thing the Confederate soldiers could get was tobacco. Well, if you're a Union soldier, you're probably not going to be able to get this. So they would swap in between the lines coffee for tobacco. That is something when I'm giving talks up here, that's something I've noticed that surprises a lot of people, that the two armies would meet and would trade stuff. Sometimes we forget, if you were a Confederate soldier or Union soldier, it's a pretty good chance that you know somebody that's in the opposing army. Especially if you were an officer, a West Point graduate, it's a good chance you know the other officers on the other side over there. So when they weren't trying to kill each other, they would meet in between lines. They would trade newspapers. That was one of the more popular items to trade. And then foodstuffs. So, coffee and tobacco. Now, anybody know what this is? The water bottle or the canteen? Something that did surprise me, during this time period, the Army made absolutely no provisions whatsoever to provide their soldiers with water. They gave you an empty canteen and you were on your own. Imagine, the campaigning mostly was done during the heat of the summer. And you're marching 10, 12, 15 miles a day on these dusty roads. Water is going to be a problem. Whenever an army crossed a creek, stream, if you were lucky enough to maybe a river, a spring, that's what I was trying to think of a minute ago, with fresh water coming out of it. But I've also read accounts of them stopping by mud holes that cows have been wallowing in, anything to fill up their canteen with water. This held 3 pints, so it's probably not going to last you a long time. I mean, this is a piece of equipment that you did not want to lose here. It's pretty ingeniously made. It's tin, and it's covered with a blue wool cover. And I didn't realize this until fairly recently. This wool cover, I thought it was just ornamental, makes the canteen look better. You could soak this canteen, get the wool cover wet, and it keeps the water cool. Even on some of the hottest days, doing living history, I would try that, and it does work. Make it a little bit more palatable for you there. Now, let's say that you are that veteran soldier that did not want to draw the hardtack and the salted pork. What are you going to do? You still got to eat. Well, there were a couple options available to you. One of them was a military term called foraging. Does anybody know another term for foraging? Stealing. Yeah, that's what that means. But it was completely acceptable in the Army. And to give you an example to prove this is a kepi right here, a hat. This is what most every soldier was issued as a recruit going in, especially in the Union Army. This was also called a forage cap. Why? You got this thing on your head. Well, in the evening, when it got time to go look for food, you pop this thing out like an accordion, and now it's a little basket. And you can raid a hen house, you can raid a farmer's garden, you can raid a farmer's orchard, you can fill this thing up with food and bring it back. And that's a whole lot better than the rations that you were issued. And something else too, imagine these armies on the move. These armies were 50, 60, even more than that, 1,000 strong, coming into an area and only staying a night or two, and 50, 60,000 soldiers are trying to eat. It's going to be worse than locusts. They are absolutely going to eat everything there, including family pets, milk cows. Everything was going to go. Your gardens were going to be stripped. The orchards were going to be stripped. The hen houses, all of that, all in the name of foraging. Lastly, another example were these sutlers. We've all heard the term sutler before. What the heck was a sutler anyway? This was a man that went around in a wagon. Those of you that have been in the military, I'm going to give an example here. Remember being out on the ranges and the gut truck would come along, or the roach coach? Yeah, well, that's what these sutlers were. They would follow the armies around and they would sell wares out of their wagon. And it was everything from butter to jams to writing paper to pencils, salt, sugar, things that you couldn't normally get. They also sold, I've got some examples here, knife and fork, a mess plate, and this mess tin. Something else too, not only did the Army not have cooks during this time period, they also didn't issue mess gear. That wasn't until 1872. You know, we're all accustomed today to give you a mess kit with a knife, fork, and a spoon. Well, that didn't happen until much later. You were on your own. Well, that's when the sutler came in. To give you an idea of how important these sutlers were, and their prices, they were always inflated. You can imagine, you've got soldiers with money, there's somebody going to be coming around to take their money. That's what these sutlers would do. They also issued tokens. And it would have, on one side, maybe a patriotic symbol. On the back side, it would have the name of the sutler and sometimes his address. I've got one that I found in Dover, and it's a sutler from Cincinnati, Ohio, and he owned a dry goods company. Here on display at the fort, we have got one here that was donated to us. So once again, it's going to give you an excuse to come up here and see the sutler token. That's an example of what the Civil War soldier was issued during the war. Ration-wise, once again, I want to invite everybody to come up here. We're at 120 Duncan Street. Come up and see us sometime.